Have you ever wondered what a queen takes with her to the grave? Not just jewels or relics, but the lingering scent of love, loss, and decay. This is not a story of Queen Victoria in life, but in death, when her body, draped in the withered lace of her wedding dress, began its slow surrender to time. A tale of undying grief, morbid devotion, and the haunting reality of royal burial. Victoria wasn't just a monarch. She was the beating heart of an empire, a widow who never stopped mourning. And in death, she chose not to rest alone, but wrapped in the memories of the man she lost, her beloved Prince Albert. When Prince Albert died in 1861, Victoria was shattered. She wore black for the rest of her life. She ordered his rooms to remain untouched, his shaving water laid out every morning, his clothes brushed and ready. To her, Albert hadn't vanished. He had simply stepped behind a curtain she, too, would one day pass through. But even in her obsession, Victoria was precise. She knew what she wanted for her funeral. She left handwritten instructions. No public lying in state. No crown atop her coffin. No pomp. She wanted to be buried, not as a sovereign, but as a woman who had once loved deeply and never stopped. What she requested shocked even her closest attendants. In her final hours, she dictated that in her coffin should be placed mementos of her private devotion. Albert's dressing gown, a plaster cast of his hand, one of his handkerchiefs, and photographs of him. But one request stood out. She wanted to be dressed in white, her wedding dress. By the time of her death in 1901, the dress was over 60 years old. The once bright silk had yellowed. The lace, delicate as a spider's web, had begun to fray. But it was still sacred to her, a relic of the moment she became his. On January 22, 1901, Victoria died at Osborne House. Her body lay on the bed she had once shared with Albert. In the hours that followed, the ritual of royal preparation began, not of statecraft, but of death. Lady Ponsonby, Victoria's dresser, and the royal physician, Sir James Reed, oversaw her final attire. They combed her thinning white hair. They buttoned the bodice of her faded wedding gown over her now fragile chest. Her arthritic fingers were wrapped around a lock of Albert's hair. His dressing gown was laid across her feet, and his photo pressed into her hand. But that wasn't all. Hidden in the folds of her gown, wrapped in tissue paper, was a secret, an object known only to a few. It was a small portrait of her servant and rumored confidant, John Brown.
This is not what she would have wanted.
She had it placed in her coffin alongside Albert's keepsakes. Victoria, in her final moment, defied even her own family, ensuring the two most important men of her life were buried with her. Then came the sealing. Victoria's body was placed in a coffin lined with lead and cedar wood. The fabric that had once danced through the halls of Westminster Abbey now rested motionless. The white silk clung softly to her skin, and the dress, already brittle, began to absorb the natural moisture of decay. Her skin, pale and waxen, pressed against fabric meant for joy. What had once symbolized purity and unity was now the shroud of death. On February 1st, 1901, under a gray sky, Queen Victoria's coffin was lowered into the royal mausoleum at Frogmore, Windsor. Her tomb was designed decades earlier, built for Albert after his death. Now it became theirs, together in marble and memory. The world moved on, the empire carried forward, but beneath the carved stone, something else was happening. Over the next decades, the cedar wood softened, the lead buckled under the silent pressure of gases. And the dress, the very wedding dress she had so tenderly chosen, began to change. Silk, when sealed without oxygen, undergoes a grim transformation. It stains, stretches, and blackens. Victorian lace, made with organic starches and fine animal fibers, breaks down, becoming stiff and fragile. The tightly sealed coffin created a greenhouse of decomposition. And inside, the wedding dress, once the centerpiece of joy, became a slow tapestry of rot. Beneath layers of royal embroidery, Queen Victoria's body underwent its own metamorphosis. The skin marbled, the soft tissues liquefied, the eyes long closed to the world shrank. Her hair, pinned neatly at death, matted into her gown, and the dress itself began to disintegrate, threads dissolving into her skin, embroidery fading like breath on glass. Though her body was never publicly exhumed, reports from the royal household decades later confirmed what was feared. Her remains had fused with the garments. Her wedding dress, after death, had become part of her, pressed into the contours of her decayed flesh. Mourning dresses, unlike burial robes, are not made to withstand time. They are symbols of loss, not armor against it. And as the years passed, the silk became fragile as ash, the lace split at the seam. The very fabric she had worn to bind her life to Albert now clung to her bones, more ghost than gown. And yet, this was not a tragedy. It was what she wanted. She had longed not to be remembered as a monarch, but as a wife, not as Victoria Regina, but as Victoria and Albert. In death, as in life, she kept him close. Today, tourists walk the grounds of Frogmore. They see the white marble statues, the lush English gardens, the quiet serenity of the royal tomb. They photograph the facade, unaware of what lies within. Beneath that marble rests the rotting lace of a wedding dress, sewn for a moment of joy, now forever bound to a decaying queen. A love story stitched into death. What remains is not just fabric or memory, but something haunting, something beautiful, a reminder that love does not fade with power, that royalty does not shield from decay, and that even empires cannot keep silk from turning to dust. Queen Victoria's tomb is not only a place of rest, it is a shrine to the impermanence of all things. Her wedding dress lies not in a museum, but in a sealed vault woven into the slow alchemy of death. What began as a celebration of union has become a relic of devotion, rotting, sacred, eternal. Because even in decay, she remains the widow of Windsor, wrapped in white, forever waiting for the man who died first, and whom she never stopped loving. Victoria's obsession with death did not begin when Albert died. It began long before, when she was still a girl. As a child, she watched the slow, painful decline of her father and grandmother. Illness was a shadow that followed her even in the gilded halls of Kensington Palace. She became fascinated with funerals, tombs, the rituals of passing. While other girls played with dolls, Victoria studied portraits of her ancestors and whispered their names beneath her breath, like prayers. This fascination hardened into something else after Albert's death, a ritualistic devotion to mourning. She wore black for 40 years, a daily uniform of sorrow. Even her undergarments were dyed black. Her meals were taken in solitude. Her writing was saturated with grief. She surrounded herself with reminders of him, his clothing, his photographs, his voice captured in fading letters. She turned mourning into a second life, a religion with Albert as its central saint. To the world, this grief was dignified, admirable, but behind palace walls, it was something more disturbing. Rooms were sealed, furniture was covered in black crepe. Footmen tiptoed through the halls as if Albert still slept in the next room. And in the center of it all was the woman who had once ruled empires, now ruled by absence. The wedding dress she had worn in 1840, white, radiant, fragile, became a relic not of celebration, but of longing. She stored it carefully. She had it displayed in private moments. She would run her fingers along the lace and whisper his name. It was no longer just a dress. It was a thread tying her to a moment when she was not alone. When Victoria died in 1901 at the age of 81, her body was frail. Her spine was curved from decades of illness. Her skin was mottled and soft, but in death, she was returned to her youth. The white silk gown that once declared her a bride now encased her as a widow. In choosing to be buried in that dress, she performed a kind of historical poetry, wrapping herself in the symbol of union for a journey she hoped would end in reunion. The fabric itself carried layers of symbolism. In Victorian society, white represented not purity, but transition. It was worn by brides, yes, but also by children, by angels in art, by the dead in ancient burial rites. Victoria's choice was not eccentric, it was ancient. She was, in her own way, stepping into the role of a sacred figure, a woman transformed by love, now traveling beyond the veil. Yet for all its beauty, silk is not kind to the dead. It is porous, it absorbs moisture, it draws the fluids of the decaying body into itself like a sponge. The lace, once stiff and strong, began to sag, collapse, and eventually disintegrate. Every layer of the dress became a map of chemical reaction, sweat, fat, and formaldehyde, warping its original texture. What was once white turned brown, then black. The edges curled, the seams burst. The embroidered roses, emblems of her family, crumbled into dust. The veil, tucked over her face, fused with the skin of her brow. And the scent, sweet, cloying, metallic, filled the sealed coffin, a perfume of royal rot. In the decades that followed, curiosity about Victoria's burial site grew. Writers speculated about her body. Spiritualists claimed to see her wandering Windsor, still searching for Albert. But no official account ever emerged. The tomb remained sealed. Respect was given.
I heard it again
And
last
yet,
night.
in quiet conversations among royal staff, there were whispers. Whispers of soft creaks beneath the mausoleum floor, of strange, rust-colored stains near the coffin base, of gas buildup, just like with Elizabeth I, pressing the lead outwards, threatening to split. But Victoria's tomb has never been opened. Her body remains untouched, entombed in silence and time, beneath layers of crumbling silk and fading lace. Yet, while her body was left undisturbed, the world above her changed. By the early 20th century, burial practices had shifted. Embalming became more scientific, less spiritual. Cremation began to rise in popularity. Royal funerals became more modernized, less intimate. Victoria's final requests now seemed archaic, even strange. No monarch since has been buried with the intensity of ritual and personal devotion that she demanded. Her tomb stands as a border between two eras, the medieval reverence for the body and the modern detachment from it. Her dress, Her beloved rotting wedding dress is the last remnant of a time when grief could shape a monarchy, when love could linger in fabric, in scent, in shadow. It raises questions. What is left of us when we're gone? Is it the stories, the symbols, or the decaying lace wrapped around our bones? For Victoria, it was all three. Let us return for a moment to that final image. Her body dressed in white, lying in a coffin lined with velvet and cedar, her gloved hand clasping Albert's photo. Around her, objects of mourning, locks of hair, crosses, letters, and the dress, its folds arranged just so, its threads trembling with the weight of history. What did it mean to her? Was it comfort? Was it hope? Or was it a final act of control, one last assertion of will, even in death? We can never know. But what we do know is this, that beneath Frogmore, in a chamber of silence and stone, a queen lies in a gown no one will ever see again. A gown woven not just of silk and lace, but of longing, memory, and decay. And in that silence, in that slow unraveling, there's a strange kind of beauty. Because sometimes the most powerful stories are not told by statues or speeches, but by what we choose to carry with us into the dark. Victoria carried love, grief, devotion, and a dress that, even in ruin, still whispers of the day she first became a bride. The threads may rot, the body may fade, but the story